Hello, a very good evening. It's 9:05 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale here with you until 10. Well, that was quite an hour, wasn't it? We're going to have another one now, possibly a little bit less combative, I don't know. We have got John Apter with us. He is chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales, and he's here to take your calls over the next hour on, well, I guess there's all sorts of different kinds of people that we want to hear from. Maybe police officers. You might want to call in and put your views to John and ask him a few questions. But also, everyone, I think, has views on law and order, has views on policing, has views on the relationship between the police force and the government. I mean, particularly maybe in London, that's certainly the case. So over to you, really. 0345 6060 973. We're streaming this hour as well. So if you'd like to watch us on Global Player or the LBC YouTube channel, Facebook feed or Twitter feed, you can do so as well. John, your warm-up act has left, the Israeli ambassador.
Yeah, thanks for that.
The main act is here. I was watching one of those police reality programmes, which I have want to do on occasion. And I said to my partner last night, after 20 minutes of this, I said, who on earth would want to be a police officer nowadays? Just look, and okay, I'm sure these programmes sort of pick the most extreme things to put on. But some of the things that your members have to put up with.
Absolutely. First of all, Iain, can I say thank you for the invite? And this came off the back of a conversation that we had on an interview. And this is my first time in a studio in over 12 months. So this is like a night out for me.
I feel your pain.
Absolutely. So thank you. Look, you're right. Who would want to join the job, as we call it now? I've been a police officer for over 28 years. And despite what you may see, the vast majority of officers I speak to every day love doing what they do. They don't like the bureaucracy. They don't like the politics. They don't like the hatred, which has increased significantly over years. But they genuinely want to do the best they can. And when we watch these reality programmes, you're right, Iain, they cram a lot of the sexy stuff, so to speak, in one programme. Yeah. It's not always that exciting, but it is always that frustrating. You know, we want to get bad people locked up. We want to do the best we can for victims. But that's a relatively small part of the job now. And obviously we've got a massive recruitment campaign, and there's a lot of people who still want to join. A lot of people want to join. It's not the job I joined. And I've got two boys who are at university, and I'm often asked, would I encourage them to join the job, or would I join again if I was my younger self? I would join again if I was my younger self. I'm not bitter and twisted about the job. It's got its challenges. It's far from perfect.
How has it changed?
Oh, wow. It's become far more political. It's far more technical. Crime has changed from when I first started all those years ago, and long before then. It's not as straightforward. Policing is not straightforward. And I think the sad thing that's happened over recent times is that policing, and certainly the members I represent, so I'm a cop, I'm not a senior officer, I'm not a commissioner or a chief constable, before people start phoning in and asking those sort of questions. I'm by rank, I'm a PC, I'm a constable, and I'm absolutely proud to be so. So I represent 130,000 police officers across England and Wales, 43 forces. And it has changed significantly. We've got the College of Policing now, which is relatively, well, it's not new, but it's been with us a relatively new recently compared to how old policing is. And yeah, it's very different than when it joined. The safety aspect, you know, you look at the kit. When I joined, I had a wooden truncheon to defend myself. I'm not quite that old that I had a whistle that I had to rely on. We had radios when I first joined back in 1992. But now we've got, you know, taser, body armour, specialist teams, better technology to help and protect us. But I always want more. Nothing is more important for me than the safety of my colleagues, and my goodness, is it needed now.
What's your biggest frustration in your role as Police Federation Chairman? I mean, you presumably have regular meetings with politicians, with the government.
Yeah.
You must have an agenda of things that you would like to change. I mean, are you being listened to?
Well, I want to take you on a bit of a journey on that, if I may, and just to put it in context. No secret that that the previous Prime Minister, Theresa May, I've been very critical of her stance on policing and criminal justice. I think she bitterly let the public down, and certainly policing. She had contempt for policing, as far as I'm concerned.
You mean when she was Home Secretary rather than, and Prime Minister? And
then Prime Minister.
Okay.
Things didn't change, really. But then we had when I first got into this role, which was in about September 2018, Theresa May was still the Prime Minister, but the Home Secretary had changed. It was Sajid Javid. And the relationships, you always have to bear in mind the politicians, and I've got immense respect for the office of the Prime Minister and the office of the Home Secretary. I'm a police officer, I'm a servant of the Crown myself. But I wanted to make it clear that I needed a relationship on behalf of my colleagues and behalf of policing, because if you don't have a relationship, Iain, you get nothing done. The barriers had been pulled up previously. I couldn't work in that environment. But I said to the Home Secretary of the day, and I've said to the current Home Secretary, I need a relationship, but I don't want to be your friend. So it's not about a cosy relationship. It's about being able to, have access. And certainly this past 12 months, I've probably spoken to the Home Secretary more than I have my own children. I mean, it's been pretty full on because of the pandemic.
Oh, really? So, I mean, how often do you have a little pretty conversation?
Well, I should be careful, shouldn't I, about sending texts to ministers?
You should. Do you finish them love J.A.?
No, it's not quite like that yet. I tell you, I have it's peaks and troughs how regular I speak with the Home Secretary. In fact, I spoke with her only on Monday, but that was a formal conversation. But what I do, and I promised my colleagues, my members, that I would do this. When horrific things happen, I cut through that red tape. Horrific things happen to my colleagues. I cut through that red tape, and I take that reality directly to the Home Secretary. And I will phone or message, and both the previous Home Secretary.
So you have the ability. You can literally just pick up the phone. You've got her in your phone, and you can just ring her up, or do you have to go through her office? How does that work?
I think the office probably get frustrated with my access, and I don't take advantage of it. It's not every day. I don't take advantage, but I'll give you an example. So when officers in London or recently in Manchester have been horrifically injured, I speak with those officers, and they tell me the trauma that they've gone through physically and very often psychologically. And I will let the Home Secretary know that. And you know what? And I'm not here, I'm not the Home Secretary spokesperson, but what she has done on many occasions is she's reached out privately to those officers. And as grumpy as we are with everything that's going on in the world, that means a lot to many of my colleagues, knowing that somebody's listening. So when you say what's important, that relationship is important. If I didn't think that relationship was in the interests of my colleagues or policing, I wouldn't invest my time and energy into it, because you do have to invest time and effort. Are we being listened to? Yes, we are. But paying conditions have suffered significantly for police officers. The pensions have been attacked by government. I understand the reasons why, but there's an awful lot of anger out there. Police officers are subject to a pay freeze this year. We're still going to ask for a pay increase, but we've been told, along with many other parts of the public sector, we're going to be subject to a pay freeze. This is on the back of 10 years of austerity. So in reality, my colleagues, police officers, who politicians will praise in times of crisis, in reality, they've had about an 18% cut in their take-home pay. That's not a government who is listening and supporting. But that's for people like me and my colleagues to try and influence
But
that.
do you get a bit of flack from your members on that? And they say, well, John, we pay you a nice big fat salary. We expect more of you to get more out of the government. You failed us.
I do. I do get an awful lot of frustration and anger and abuse sometimes.
Do you? Really?
Yeah. And you know what, Iain? It goes with the job. My colleagues...
I feel your pain.
Yeah. My colleagues deserve the absolute best. They deserve to be supported and protected. I genuinely do my best, but I accept that's not always good enough for some of my colleagues. I don't accept some of the abuse, and that, I've articulated that, whether on social media, but I understand the frustration. But the vast majority, I get out and patrol with colleagues as often as I can, and I really enjoy that. And when I do get out and about with colleagues, and we spend full shifts, late shifts, day shifts, whatever. Maybe not so much the night shifts, so try and avoid them.
They're the most. I went out on a night shift once. That was quite fun.
No, but I'm joking. All the shifts, I really enjoy getting out with colleagues because they talk to me, they open up, and because they see me. I mean, the amount of times I turn up in my uniform and people will say, colleagues will say, blimey, didn't realise you were still a police officer. Well, many of my friends would say I'd stopped being a police officer a long time ago, and they didn't realise I was a constable, a PC, one of them. And that, that means a lot to me because I want to be relevant to them. I want to do the best I can, and I'll continue doing that for as long as they want me.
How has COVID affected policing? Because police officers are effectively at the sharp end, and I've seen one or two videos on social media of the kind of incidents that they've had to get involved in and put themselves at risk.
Absolutely. It's turned policing upside down. The impact on my colleagues, and not only police officers, but police staff and volunteers, special constables. I mean, special constables, these are volunteers who face the same abuse that their regular colleagues do. They don't get paid for it, and they've really stepped up the excess hours that they've been doing. But policing has been turned upside down. This phrase has been used many times, hasn't it? But it's unprecedented. I remember when the legislation was being changed early last year, and we were there talking with Home Office officials and my colleagues about what it meant. And it was a state of disbelief. We couldn't believe the laws that were being brought in to try and combat this virus. And then what we found as time moved on, obviously in the first lockdown, there was an awful lot of understanding and compliance. And I hate to use this phrase, but I think there was a bit of a novelty, people working from home. I mean, the loss of life was horrendous. But as time then went on and the legislation kept changing repeatedly, I think it's been changed almost 70 times over that period of time. Very often my colleagues were starting a shift not knowing that the law had been changed because they hadn't received the guidance. And then they would do what they felt was right, trying to keep people safe. But either mistakes were made or there was a genuine confusion with the public as to what was expected of them. And my colleagues were being vilified in the media. They became the punch bags for society, both physically and figuratively speaking. So it's been incredibly tough. And at the same time, Iain, let's not forget, my colleagues are human beings. They have a uniform or they have a warrant card, but it doesn't prevent them from catching this horrible virus, or their families. And we've lost 30 officers and staff in policing to this horrible virus, and many, many others. And I heard on the programme last night, Stephen from the City of London, and the impact on the virus has had on him and his family. And, the effects of long COVID, as a society, we don't know what the impact of that's going to be yet. Same for policing. We have what were very fit, able, competent officers who've been struck down with this virus, and they are still suffering many, many, many months later. And we don't know what the outlook is for them. Yeah. So there's some real concerns here, real concerns.
Right, we're going to come to your calls in a moment. If you've got questions for John on any aspect of policing, as he says, he's not a politician, he's not a chief constable. He does represent, though. I mean, how many police officers in England and Wales now?
Well, we represent from constable up to and including chief inspector, 130,000.
That's quite a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot.
So if you're one of the 130,000, you might like to phone in and give us your views on what's going on and what the Police Federation does for you. Or maybe it doesn't. It's 19 minutes past 9 on LBC.
This is LBC. on LBC. Text 84850.
22 minutes past 9. You can watch us on Global Player, the LBC YouTube channel, Facebook feed and Twitter feed. John Apter is with me, the chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Cressida Dick, the head of the Metropolitan Police. What interaction, do you have similar interaction with her as you have with the Home Secretary?
It's slightly different because the Commissioner of the Metropolitan will have a local federation, so the Metropolitan Police Federation, and there'll be an awful lot of interaction there. But because it's, I have interaction with many chief constables around the country, and the Commissioner I will have conversations with, but probably not as regular. But I know her and I meet her at meetings and so on.
Who's the easiest to deal with, Pretty or Cressida?
I'm not going to get into that. I get on with everyone.
Such a politician.
I get on with everyone. So.
Now, she is on with Nick Ferrari tomorrow morning.
Yes.
Would you like to put a question to her?
Oh, wow, you've put me on the spot there, haven't you? So, well, it might save me a phone call. I do actually, Iain. Yes. Protests. We've seen some pretty horrific protests, not only in London but across the country. But one of the things the Police Federation, I know my colleagues in the Metropolitan Police Federation are very active around this piece of work. We have seen we've seen an increasing occasions, it seems, where our colleagues are put into the line of fire, so to speak, policing protests, but they don't have all of the proper kit on. So the public would see it as like the riot equipment. It's what we called level 2 public order equipment, the riot helmets and the shields and so on. Now, there is a view from many officers, not only in London but further afield, that sometimes they're put into situations without all of the kit because it doesn't look good, the perception. So I would say to the Commissioner, what is more important? Is it perception or is it officer safety? I think I know what the Commissioner would say, but that would then get me to ask further, well, why do we time and time again see officers being put into clearly confrontational situations and they don't always have the right kit to protect them?
Let's hopefully we can put that to the Commissioner tomorrow. Right, let's go to Simon in Southampton. Hello, Simon.
Evening, gents. My question is, so I was brought up to respect police officers, and all we see nowadays is YouTube videos of officers doing their job, but they're being abused, taunted, heckled by, a lot of cases, the person that they're trying to, the subject of their reason for visit, I don't know what the word is, but do you think that law should be passed to say that an individual may not deliberately video a police officer?
Evening, Simon. Thanks for the call. It's a really important one because we've seen an increasing number of people who are putting on social media without context a snippet of video and then lambasting police officers. And that video is very often then picked up by the media, who, again, don't always put the context. So there's a couple of things, Simon, that I've been calling for. First of all, vast majority of police officers now out on patrol will have body-worn cameras. Body-worn cameras were brought in many years ago. In fact, you're calling from Southampton. That's my force. Hampshire Constabulary is my force. We've had body-worn video for years. And we were put under pressure, policing was put under pressure to have body-worn video to show how corrupt and how bad we were. Well, actually, what it showed is how professional and how dignified we were in the face of such hostility and violence. I'm not saying all the time, I accept that, but the vast majority of the time, body-worn video is one of the best bits of kit that policing could have had introduced. So I've been pushing for the National Police Chiefs Council, so the body that represents the senior, the bosses across policing, to start releasing, where we legally can, our own body-worn video to show that context. So that's one side of it. And we've started doing that, but it's not always possible because of legal reasons. As far as should it be a criminal act to video people, it's stepping into an area about a freedom of speech, freedom of activity for individuals, because you're allowed to film things out in the public domain with some exceptions. So I think there needs to be a balance, Simon. I think there does. And I think everybody needs to play the part. Certainly the social media platforms, the media, policing by showing the context, and the legislators, Parliament. And I've raised this time and time again with government, with the Home Secretary. As far as legislation, look, yes, if it protects my colleagues from being lambasted unfairly in the media, then yes, we should do everything we can. But I think going to legislation is probably more of a last resort. Let's get the other things in place first.
Simon, quick response?
Yeah, no, fair enough. I just think that the way society is going, I mean, these people have just got no... it's like police have become a sport rather than people to respect and people, you know, on the basic level, to people that could help you or would help you, you know. And it's that sort of person I really just can't tolerate. I just would rather you took their toys away so that they couldn't, couldn't do it.
Iain, could I just one point where I do think, Simon, that we should do more legislative wise is those idiots who video people assaulting police officers almost like for sport. There is legislation in place failing to assist a constable and others. I think we should be far more robust in that and seize their phones.
That's quite a difficult one though, isn't it? Because somebody might use the defence while I was doing it, so you've got the evidence as to what happened.
In the reality on the street, we know who's doing it to help and support, and we know who's doing it for sport.
So don't do it, basically. That's the message. We'll take more of your calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. Quick text here from someone saying, can you say to your guest tonight, the police are doing a remarkable job. Keep going, and you've got the full support of the men and ladies here at the Defence School of Policing and Guarding.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That sounds an interesting...
It does. It does. And you know what? It's interesting because you would think if you look on certain platforms of social media, I know I keep going back to social media, you'd think that everybody hates the police. They don't. I still maintain, and I say, Iain, I'm not here to say that we are perfect. I think we're the best police service in the world. We're the most scrutinised. We're the most transparent. We're the most held to account. But I genuinely think the vast majority of the public support their police. I genuinely do.
OK. Right, news headlines time. It's 9:30. David Dom.
Scientific advisors have been meeting to discuss ways to tackle the spread of the Indian variant of COVID-19. Additional coronavirus vaccine clinics are being set up in parts of Lancashire to tackle a spike in infections. David Cameron has told MPs he had a big economic investment in the now collapsed finance firm Greensill Capital. The former Prime Minister says he was not acting in his personal interest when he lobbied ministers and officials. The UN is warning violence in the Middle East is still escalating, with the potential to turn into a war. Dozens have been killed during fighting between Palestinian groups and Israel. LBC weather. Showers dying out for most of the UK tonight. Rain continuing in parts of central and southern England and South Wales. Cool in the north with a low of 4 Celsius.
This is LBC.
At
Iain Dale on LBC.
9:34. We'll come to your calls in a second. Really interesting text here from Chris in Staines, because I have a lot of sympathy with this. He says, I understand that new police recruits are required to undertake a degree course during their first 3 years. Why? Does this not exclude a large number of good people? Degrees are not for everyone. It's the same with nurses, isn't it? I'm thinking, why does every nurse now have to have a degree? You kind of lose out on a particular maybe kind of nurse or police officer that 20 years ago would have been seen as integral to the police force.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Goodness for that.
I couldn't agree more. We had some changes brought in about the way that we recruit people into policing. It's changed fundamentally. Now, what I think the decision makers of the day were trying to convince themselves was the level that police officers were working at was equal to getting a degree. I get that, because policing is very complex now, and some of the ways that we investigate things very technical, and the abilities that you have to have, maybe not when I first joined. But what it transformed into was this degree entry. Now, we want all sorts of people in policing from all sorts of backgrounds. What this current model of recruitment has caused are our recruits are far younger. Now, that's not bad, but it means that our percentage of older officers is decreasing, and we want all sorts of experience. So people from different jobs, such as the public sector or the military, it's preventing them. Although there's some initiatives going on to try and fix that, and I've been a real advocate for, if people want degrees, fine. We've also got the issue in that the way that colleagues get degrees now in policing, you earn as you learn. So you don't have to pay for the degree. There is a concern that this is costing an awful lot of money. Will people at the end of that period of time say, thank you for my degree, off I go?
Which surely there must be something to say, well, if you do a degree, you've got to give us 5 years or something.
No, there isn't. No, there isn't.
Well, that's mad.
Yeah.
Who brought this in?
Well, College of Policing, not the current leadership, but all of the risks were laid out, and a number of chief constables understand and support our view. In fact, one chief constable from Northamptonshire, Nick Adderley, spoke out about this very issue this week. Now, I'm not saying we should rip up what's been done already and throw it away, but the College of Policing are doing a full review on everything they're doing at the moment, and this is something that we'll be talking about. So Chris is spot on. We need all sorts in the job.
Let's go to your calls again. James is in Gillingham. Hello, James.
Good evening to you. Very
Hi.
Nice to be able to speak on your show tonight.
Well, we love having you on. What would you like to ask?
First of all, good evening, Police Constable Apter.
Hello, James. How are you?
Oh, well, as I said to you in the Twitter thing that I sent you the other day, it's been a difficult year.
It has, James, and I think actually I now know who you are on Twitter, and thank you for your support. You're very supportive. If that's you, if it's not, then I take that back.
What I'd like to, one of the questions is quickly coming in about degrees. I'm not hugely supportive of, but then I am old school. I think of policing as being a vocation, not a profession. You're either called to do it or you're not. But there you go. When I was a police fed rep, I used to deal with officers who were exhibiting mental health crises. Mm-hmm. And even at that time, we weren't very good with dealing with our own suffering from mental health problems. We're very good dealing with members of the public. If we had to intervene and use Section 136 to get them the care that they needed, but we weren't very good at dealing with our own. Now, throughout this pandemic, we've seen a lot more officers, because of the stresses what officers have been having to do in the pandemic. We've seen a lot more officers presenting with mental health problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your articulations with the Home Office, with the Home Secretary, what are your discussions with her in relation to providing better support for those officers who are going through those difficult crises? Because, and I know sometimes in the job, when I was in the job, I would be representing an officer who was having a serious depressive illness, who has got a serious depressive illness, and he's been told to man up by his superiors. And that used to get me into a lot of trouble, because I used to be incandescent when I heard someone say to someone who had a mental health problem to man up, especially if it's your own colleague.
That's the worst thing you can say, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is.
James, you've raised such an important issue, and you will know from following me on social media, this is something very close to my heart. First of all, I agree with you. Policing is and must stay a vocation. It is a calling. When it comes to the mental health crisis, not only in policing but in society, I think it has been recognised now. Certainly in policing it has, over the past 5 years or so. But before then, James, you're right. It was ignored. I mean, if you dared to say that you had a problem, you would either be laughed out of the room, or considered a problem child by bosses. I'm talking a few years ago. And look, I talk from experience, because when I was an operational police officer, I was on traffic. Don't hold that against me. But I was a family liaison officer.
You're never coming back off.
No, I know. But I was a family liaison officer, and I was a specialist road death investigator. Now, me and my colleagues were exposed to more trauma than you could ever imagine. The physical trauma, but also the emotional trauma. I knocked on many doors and changed many lives, and that really affected me. And I had to get help, James. And I know many of my colleagues have had to do the same, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed.
How long did it take you, though, to actually do it, or actually tell somebody that you had? I was very fortunate with the team that I worked on. We had annual, I used to call them check up from the neck up. My colleagues did. That's what we called them. A few of my colleagues need that.
No. And so annually, we used to have our assessment, and generally it would come to the surface then. But I suppose it depends on your character. Me personally, I'd like to think that I recognise when I need help, and it's not only the job. And I speak to, as I said to you earlier, I speak to police officers all the time. And not only is it the trauma that you're exposed to, and police officers are exposed to more trauma than any other profession. The complex PTSD that is rife within policing is a real issue. So you put all that together, and then alongside that you just throw in life's normal problems, whether it's divorce or money worries, because although you're a police officer, you're not immune from that. So going back to James's point,
as we know from Line of Duty.
Indeed, absolutely.
Which is obviously factual.
No comment. So going back to James's point, I genuinely believe, James, and look, I don't sugarcoat my conversations, whether it's with senior officers or with the Home Office or the Home Secretary, and they wouldn't expect it or want it, because we need to move together on things. The mental health crisis is a real problem. We've got something in policing now called Oscar Kilo. It's an initiative by the senior police officers, but also the College of Policing, doing some really good stuff. But it needs to make even more progress. Legislatively, the Police Federation, and I'm really proud of this, you'll know that the big bill is going through Parliament at the moment, and within that bill is the Police Covenant, something that the Police Federation have been campaigning for. That will legally, James, offer more support, psychological and physical support, not only to serving officers and volunteers and members of staff, but also retired colleagues. So that is a massive step in the right direction. But I'm not saying that we fix the problem. And what I say to chief constables and leaders in policing all the time, we talk about well-being. It's got to be more than a poster on a wall. It's got to be more than ticking a box. It's got to mean something. It's got to be tangible, because we do have a problem within policing. And I think it's recognised now. Well, I know it's recognised now. So I can only do my best, James, me and my colleagues from the Police Federation, well-being, mental health support, and we've done our bit. We've invested heavily in this. We provide help and support to colleagues as well who are in crisis. The Police Federation does, and I know many forces do. So we are doing more, but it is a big problem.
Okay, James, thank you very much. Let's move on to Simon. Hi, Simon.
Evening.
Hello. What would you like to say?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
I've been working. Thanks, John, for recognising the work of special constables, of which I am one, and I think we bring a good dimension to policing. In fact, I've been working during COVID. I've been working full shifts with the police because we've been able to. I'm in a position where I can. But because of COVID, one of the rulings has been for my particular constabulary in the south of England is that we have to be single crewed. And we're not. And when you were talking about kit earlier, we're not able to even do the training for to carry a taser, for example, and we face the same risks as our fellow colleagues, yet we don't have the same protection. And I wondered, I know we're not represented yet by the Federation, but I wondered, how we can push this further to try and get this protection.
Well, Simon, I've spoken about special constables this evening, and I talk about them a lot. I was a special constable before I joined the job. I always felt, I don't know whether you know, Iain, but the special constabulary, the volunteers I spoke about, they carry a warrant card. They've got exactly the same powers as I do as a police officer. When I was a special 30 years ago over on the Isle of Wight, I was out on shift, but I wasn't allowed to drive vehicles. I was never out on my own. Nowadays, special constables are doing exactly the same job. They are response officers, they're specialist officers. They carry the same risk. But they're not allowed in law to be members of the Police Federation. So they don't have a statutory body like the Federation.
Why?
So, well, because it's bonkers. Because we've been fighting for this for several years. The previous Prime Minister wouldn't allow the law to be changed. In my first meeting with the then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, I raised this with him, and he started the ball rolling to change the law. So in this bill that I talk about, there's a number of things, the Police Crime and Courts and Sentencing Bill, bit of a mouthful. There's a number of things in there that the Police Federation has been campaigning for. One of them is the covenant I've spoken about. One is to increase the sentences for those who assault emergency workers, even more than it is already. That needs to be sorted. Better protection for emergency drivers. But also to allow special constables to be members of the Police Federation if they want to. So it is going to happen, Simon, and I would hope it will happen by the end of this year, beginning of next. When it comes to taser, look, there is a real issue because, first of all, not all of my colleagues who want them have taser yet, something that I've been campaigning for. Do I think when the legislation is in place, special constables should, if they want to carry taser, be able to carry taser? Yes, I do. And I've been very public and vocal about that. It will give you the protection that I've been calling on my members to have for many years.
Simon, thank you very much for that. We'll take more of your calls in a minute. We've got 15 more minutes with John Apter, the chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. It's 9:46.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Iain Payne.
Almost 5 million people in England are waiting for hospital treatment, according to NHS figures. Are you one of them?
Iain Payne on LBC. Welcome. Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 10 to 10. Let's go to Ben in Nottingham. Hello, Ben.
Hello, good evening to you both.
Evening.
Evening, Ben.
So I am currently a serving PCSO. I've just submitted my assessment centre for joining as a cop. I'm going to try not to go over old ground because I think one of the texts that you read out kind of stole my thunder about the degree stuff.
Sorry about that.
So my question, John, is as much as I appreciate that the degree joiners are costing more in terms of the money that is having to be paid for their degree, but do you think that the wage for the first year should be higher? Because from my point of view, luckily I've been able to get on the old route with knots before the deadline in June next year. But for the degree route, for someone like myself, I'm 32 years of age with a wife and 2 kids. For me to do the degree route, by the time my shift allowance at the moment as a PCSO and everything is, and any overtime I do, it would be about a 10 grand pay cut.
Yeah.
Shocking, isn't it?
It is, and it's completely wiping out a huge section of society that would, probably be fantastic cops, but that wage is not doable for anyone with any sort of financial commitments that's got a bit of life experience behind them.
Yeah, Ben, I couldn't agree more, and I feel a bit bad. Everybody's calling, I'm agreeing with, and this is not. I'm not just agreeing off the hoof. These are things that we've been saying in the Police Federation for a long time. I mentioned earlier, Ben, that in real terms, police officers have had an 18% cut in their pay, and I know staff have suffered similar, but I represent police officers. The starting salary for police officers in some areas is as low as £19,000. £19,000, which is shocking. It averages up a little bit more than that, and you go through the increments. And I'm not saying that to get life experience, if we have somebody who's earning £50,000, we can't match that, of course. But it's got to be a salary, a wage that recognises the risk and what's expected, what society expects of a police officer.
I don't know if you know this. How does that compare with nurses and teachers?
I haven't got those details. I don't know off the top of my head. And that's often used as a comparison with the nurses. I think
because my instinct, and because I remember reading the figures, but I can't actually remember what they exactly are. My instinct is that the starting rate for teachers and nurses is far higher than that.
Yeah, back in the day, it was the other way around. Police officer starting salary was higher, and I don't have the figures on the starting salary. But talking about police officers, the pay, the starting pay, is not enough. It doesn't attract people with life experience, as Ben says, and whether it's people like Ben who've got a police staff role, he's a PCSO, brilliant skills to transfer across as a police officer. But it's the same with people from the military and others. I speak to people who are desperate to join policing as a police officer, but they simply can't afford it. And they're not expecting too much, but they can't afford to start on just over 20 grand a year. It's not right, with what society expects. So I agree, Ben, but we're fighting, Ben, but we're in a period of time at the moment where financially the Treasury are not being as helpful as far as starting pay is concerned with policing.
Okay, Ben, thank you. James is in Watford. Hi, James.
Oh, good evening. Lovely to speak to you. My question is, John, do you and your colleagues in the police force feel politicised? For instance, do you find that you adjust your approach to, say, the Black Lives Matter protest compared to maybe the lockdown protests or the Sarah Everard protests? Right. And how easy is it for you to remain apolitical in this climate?
Yeah, if I can, thanks, James. If I can talk about the protests and our approach to them in a moment. But as far as policing being political, we are more political now than we've ever been. And we've, although policing, I'm not allowed as a police officer to be a member of a political party. Police officers are not allowed to be a member of a union. We're a staff association. We're not a union. I've got good constructive relationships with the shadow Home Secretary and the shadow Home Office, so to speak. But we are more political now than we've ever been. If you look at the recent elections that we've just had, police and crime commissioners, and I know we have a mayor in London, but when police and crime commissioners were first introduced, across England and Wales, I think a third were independent, and then there was Conservative and Labour and other parties. This time round, there is no independence at all. Every police and crime commissioner or mayor are associated to a political party. So that makes us, more political.
I don't know whether you can answer this. It might be too political, but I've always thought police and crime commissioners were a complete waste of time and they should all be abolished. Do you have a view on that?
When the concept of, I am going to be diplomatic, when the concept of police and crime commissioners was first introduced and first mooted, me and many of my colleagues would say this is, politics in policing shouldn't be allowed, a waste of money. And when they were first introduced, there was a lot of adjustment. And even then, the political parties, some of them were saying, well, they're not going to last. PCCs, police and crime commissioners, are here to stay. And you know what, Ian? Doesn't matter what party. I've worked with some around the country. I've worked with some incredibly good police and crime commissioners, really good, really focused about victim care, and that includes my colleagues who are victims. And like I'm sure with any with any appointment, you'll get good and bad and indifferent.
In terms of the police being politicised, when you hear people from the Black Lives Matter movement, or indeed people on the hard left saying the police should be defunded, I mean, that if someone had said that 5 years ago, I would have just laughed at them. But that now seems to be being taken seriously by people.
Yeah, and the problem is, look at the consequence. I mean, to defund the police or to top slice it to pay for other things not police related. We are already, I would argue, the government won't accept this, but I would argue we are already underfunded. We need more money in policing. The uplift of 20,000 officers, as welcome as it is, it doesn't fill the gap of those we've lost. We need even more. So, James, do we approach protests differently? We approach every protest differently. And you have to be sensitive to certain protests. But I would say, no, you don't look at the politics. We don't look at the politics. You look at the type of protest that you're policing, because we don't want to cause protest to turn into something more violent. And sadly, that's what we've seen in recent months.
James, thank you very much for that. Quick one from David in Romford. David, we've really nearly reached the end of the programme, so need to be quick, please.
Yeah, good evening, Ian. I'll make this as quick as I can. My question, John, is do you feel like the Federation and yourself honestly represent the rank and file officers of the federated ranks? Two main reasons I ask that. The first one is...
we haven't got time for the reasons, David, I'm afraid. 30 seconds.
I can imagine what you're talking about. It's about pensions, probably, David. David, it is a real issue. Yes, I do generally think that we, at local level and national, we do the best we can for our members in really difficult circumstances, and I'll continue to do the best I can.
And quick final comment. I've reached the end of Series 2 of Line of Duty. I'm a late developer. How true to life is it? Is there an AC-12 and anti-corruption units, and do you enjoy it?
We have professional standards departments. I've never seen them flying around on blue lights or anything like that. It's not as realistic. It's good. It's brilliant telly. Although I didn't like the last episode.
Well, I haven't got there yet, so don't spoil it. But I'm liking it more than I thought I might.
No, it is.
John Apter, it's been a pleasure. We'll have you back. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'll be back on Monday from 7. In the meantime, you can enjoy my 6 podcasts. Darren Adam is coming up at 1. Next, though, it's Ian Payne.
Thanks, Iain. Almost 5 million people in England are waiting for hospital treatment, and more than 400,000 have already seen their surgery delayed for at least a year.
These aren't abstract figures. These are actually people who are in pain. They are people who, if we can't get to them quick enough, could suffer permanent disablement.
Are you one of these statistics? I'd like to hear from you. Doctors have described the figure as stomach-churning and showed COVID's disruption of normal care had left patients in pain, agony and fear about their health.
We need to make sure that those who are the most seriously ill need to be prioritised.
So what's it been like for you? Have you been waiting for months for a hospital appointment? Have you shied away from going to your local hospital because you don't want to catch COVID? Or perhaps you don't want to take up your doctor and nurse's precious time? So if you've been on a hospital waiting list, I'd like to hear from you.